Welcome to episode 3 of the read-along book club of Yoko Ogawa's The Memory Police. I know last episode I said stuff happened, but stuff this time really happens. I mean, the Memory Police show up, calendars go disappeared, novels go disappeared. The thing that I said was going to happen definitely happened. The little love affair between R and our narrator. But something even more interesting than that happens at the very, very end. I seem to pick these stopping points in the novel very well because something pivotal happens, which I will get to very soon. But before I move on, let me know how you're feeling about the novel. Are you still enjoying it? Are you finding it tedious? What were your favorite parts? With that said, let's get on with chapter 15. And something annoying happened. One morning, my typewriter suddenly broke. No matter how hard I tapped the keys, the levers wouldn't move to strike the paper. So we are back within the novel, and the story becomes even more twisted. It used to be a love story between a woman who could not speak, who had to type all of her words, all of her communications to this man who was her typing teacher. And now it's turning into a weird kidnapping story? I'm not quite sure, but let us move on. Up until I typed goodnight to him the night before, the typewriter had functioned normally. And so what do? They take it up to the steeple because there is an alleged repair shop there. And as they make their way into the room, she noticed the ceiling was low and there were no windows except for a circle of glass at the very top of the steeple. The sole source of light was a single bulb that hung from the ceiling, too weak to illuminate the entire space, the whole space. There was no wind, but it swung slightly on its cord nonetheless. That's a cool visual. I feel like every torture room or some kind of prisoner's basement has a single light bulb, right? That seems to be a very common fixture. And the fact that it's swaying without any kind of wind gives it a horrific element, a ghostly element. Let's see if any ghosts show up by the end of this book. But he asks her to sit down in the middle of the room, and she's wondering, when is he going to fix this? When is he going to fix this? And I gave him a tap on the shoulder and pointed to my typewriter sitting atop the heap. But he paid no attention and instead took out a stopwatch and began polishing it with a scrap of velvet. And he continues to do that. He seemed to be content to go on polishing the stopwatch no matter how long I waited. And he says, the intermediate class is a test today, so I have to give this a good polishing. But she takes another look around the room and she sees that it's filled with typewriters stacked as high as her head. And then she gets an idea. Of course, I could simply use one of these machines and then I would be able to talk with him as I always had. But she picked up the newest one. But then what he says is, they're all useless. He said, still staring at the stopwatch. Every last one of them. There was also no paper in the room whatsoever. And she continues to go through this mental exercise, asking questions. Why won't you fix it? What's wrong with it? I can't stand it if I can't talk to you. And he immediately says, your voice will never come back. Your voice is trapped inside this machine. It's not broken. It's just been sealed off now that it no longer has a purpose. It's an extraordinary sight, don't you think? He said. Every one of these is a voice. And she pleads with him, of course, in her head. Why are you doing this? You don't seem to understand. There's no point in trying to talk anymore. And he puts his hand over her mouth. You'll forget you ever had a voice. We're definitely getting into horror thriller territory, and I'm enjoying it because the story was already kind of weird. And it's become even stranger. What started off as a simple, odd love story about a woman who could not speak and must type her words to this man, to her lover. Now he has taken her to the top of this church steeple and it seems to be keeping her as a prisoner, right? It gets worse as we move on through this group of chapters. And he asks her, do you know why I became a typing teacher? I don't know. I don't understand anything. And you don't need a voice to type, he said, closing his hand more tightly around my throat. In the classroom, you were all silent. Not one word while you were typing. But the fingers, they moved with nothing but the sound of tapping to accompany them. And then you would begin to talk about anything you wanted to. But what could be more natural? I say what I want to say, move my fingers as I want to move them. You only give orders in the class. I was glad I was able to erase your voice. Did you know that an insect will fall silent if you cut off its antennae? But don't worry, you'll be staying right here. And he goes down to teach the intermediate typing class. And he closes the door behind him. I could hear the sound of a heavy lock turning and his footsteps receding. Then I was alone. Interesting development. Like I said, I'm really liking the strange turn. And we'll notice too that this story is paralleling the narrator's real story as it unfolds further. I realized that the woman in my novel had also become trapped in a tight place. And the next morning when I woke up, the calendars had disappeared. What's interesting about calendars disappearing is something that I believe he's the ex-hat maker brings up. What happens to the seasons? If the calendars disappear, which are just really a means for us to measure time, does time itself change? And that's something I didn't consider. And that's one thing I really appreciate about this book is it's taking objects to a different level, right? Not only what they are, but what they do or what they're used for. And how does that affect the world at large? And we find out that R was not as upset over the calendars as he had been about the photographs. I think that's pretty obvious, right? His son was just born. He could have had a photograph of his child, but he had to have a drawing instead. As I watched the ashes, it occurred to me that the disappearances were perhaps not as important as the memory police wanted us to believe. And we find people have gathered in the street and they were talking in small groups. And a couple of her neighbors show up, the ex-hat maker and the other woman who lives across the street. They're telling about all of the terrible things that are going on. Each one in turn told of his or her trials finding enough to eat because the markets are not stocked very well. And this is when the ex-hat maker says, I wonder if spring will ever come. With the calendars gone, no matter how long we wait, we'll never get to a new month. So spring will never come. And in fact, he was right, as we see at this final paragraph. In the end, however, it was the old woman's prediction that turned out to be accurate. No matter how long we waited, spring never came, and we lay buried under the snow along with the ashes of the calendars. Which brings us to chapter 16, and they are celebrating the old man's birthday. But our narrator goes looking for supplies, and at last there isn't much there. But she runs into a sad old woman with an empty basket and fills it with celery out of pity. She goes and buys some fish and some other goods, and we have the old man finally showing up. Precisely on time that day, dressed in his only suit, wearing a striped tie, his hair had been neatly slicked back. And they have such a great time. They're cooking the food, they're having a conversation, but what's most interesting is when they exchange gifts, as you know. I have something for you, I said. As our turned to the light, I reached under the bedspread and pulled out the present I had hidden there, a porcelain shaving set I'd found at the Notion store that also had a place for a bar of soap and a pot of talcum powder. And the old man is quite tickled at this, but what happens next is even more interesting. I have a present for you too, said R. We had finished the cake barely 3 bites each, and we were sipping our tea 1 cup each. He turned in his chair, opened his desk drawer, and brought out a wooden box that was about the same size as the cake I had baked. The box was stained dark brown and carved with a geometric pattern of diamond shapes. 4 small legs resembling cat's paws were attached to the bottom. I've used it for a long time, for tie pins and cufflinks. I'm sorry it's secondhand, but I don't think you'll find anything like it in stores now. I suppose you could say it's from another time. The box was lined with felt, and a mirror was affixed to the inside of the lid. No record spinning, no hidden instrument, and yet a melody was coming from it. Yes, it is a music box. And as I listened transfixed, I felt the same slow spinning sensation that I felt every time something disappeared. Where is it coming from? The old man asked before I could say anything. We were both clearly puzzled. And of course, it's coming from inside the box. They've just forgotten what a music box is. It's not really magic, R said. It's an orugoru. Orugoru. The old man and I divided the words between us. It's a music box. It plays music all by itself thanks to an internal mechanism. You don't remember? Of course they don't remember, R. Come on, man. I desperately wanted to be able to tell R that I remembered, but no matter how hard I concentrated, the object sitting before me did not trigger a single memory. So this is something that's already disappeared, asked the old man. That's right, R replied. A very long time ago. I'm not quite sure when I realized that the disappearances weren't affecting me, but I think it must have been about the time the Orugoru disappeared. I told no one. I knew instinctively that I had to keep silent, but that was also when I decided to begin hiding as many of the objects that disappeared as I could. It was impossible for me to simply discard them the way everyone else did. Touching them became a way of confirming that I was still whole. This box was the first thing I ever hid. I unraveled a seam in the bottom of my gym bag and sewed the box inside, which is why I can't possibly accept something so precious. And then we get back to more of the decaying heart talk. When I looked over at R, so you really think our hearts are decaying? I don't know whether that's the right word, but I do know that you're changing, and not in a way that can be easily reversed or undone. It seems to be leading to an end that frightens me a great deal. An end, I murmured to myself. It was not as though I had ever thought about this. End, conclusion, limit. How many times have I tried to imagine where I was healed, using words like these? It feels terribly odd to have something that has disappeared right here before my eyes, I said. After all, this is something that supposedly no longer exists. Yet here we are looking at this box and listening to the music and pronouncing the name Orugoru. Doesn't that seem strange to you? Not strange at all. The only thing that's different is the hearts of those who once heard it. I understand, I said. It's not the box's fault that it's disappeared, but what can we do? It's disturbing to see things that have disappeared, like tossing something hard and thorning into a peaceful pond. It sets up ripples, stirs up a whirlpool below, throws up mud from the bottom, so we have no choice, really, but to burn them or bury them or send them floating down the river, anything to push them as far away as possible. Is the music from the box that painful? No, not at all. I don't think so at all. Which is why you should wind it up once a day in the quietest place on the boat where no one is likely to hear. Of course, said the old man. I'll be very careful with it. I'll put it in the cupboard in the bathroom where I keep the tooth powder and hair tonic and soap. It was a wonderful party, I said. Indeed it was, said R. The best birthday party I can remember. He reached out to slide the music box toward the old man. The hinges creaked and the music died. And at that very instant, the front doorbell gave a shrill ring. The memory police have finally arrived. I froze, instinctively grabbing the old man's arm. Oh yeah, we're on chapter 17. The bell continued to ring. The memory police, I whispered, though my voice trembled so much I hardly recognized it. And they come in, 5 or 6 of them, and their operation proceeded as it always did, efficiently, thoroughly, systematically, and without any trace of emotion. So the first thing she's worried about is the plates, right? The food she just prepared for, of course, 3 people, and there's only 2 people in the room, her and the old man. But she comes up with a brilliant excuse on the spot, saying that she cooks food ahead of time. And throughout this entire sequence, she's hearing the melody of the music box playing inside her head. And I really like that because not only is it something that could get her in trouble, but it's kind of setting the tempo for the scene. And then one of the men finds something. What's this? A novel, I replied, speaking in the direction of the door. A novel, he repeated, as though the word was somehow vulgar. Then he threw the papers on the floor with a snort. But then, what happens? As I watched them, I realized something important. One corner of the rug was ever so slightly turned up, and once I noticed it, I was unable to take my eyes off the turned up corner, and this is a big issue for them in the scene, of course. But we know that they don't find it. They get away scot-free so far, and so far the old man is not a double agent. But they do find some calendars, and he says the disappearance of the calendars means that we no longer have any use for days and dates. You know what happens if we keep things around us that should have gone away. And he flips through the pages at random, but apparently has no interest in what was written on them. We need to get rid of this right away. And then he lights the pages on fire and tosses it out the window. At that moment, as though the sound were a prearranged signal, the leader of the group called out, "Stop!" And the corner of the rug had escaped their notice. And outside, having completed their search, the memory police climbed into their trucks and prepared to depart. But then 3 shadows emerged from the house to the east of mine. It was too dark to distinguish their features, but they walked wearily through the snow, backs bent, the memory police pushing them from behind. I had no idea they were hiding people in there, said the former hat maker. Who would have thought of it? So hopefully this is enough of a distraction for the memory police to steer clear of the house, but somehow I don't think that's going to happen because there is a new member of the family in the house that I believe is going to give something away. And that night I wept in the hidden room along with R. He talks about the rug corner being turned up so slightly, and she is weeping, but she does not really know why she's crying. She can't explain it to herself, much less stop it. I think all this crying must be proof that my heart is so weak that I don't know how to help myself. But I'd say just the opposite, says R. Your heart is doing everything it can to preserve its existence. And I watched as my tears fell on his hand, and then he took me in his arms. There it is, folks. There it is. But it gets juicier. It gets juicier. The people in the house next door were loaded into a truck and taken away, I murmured. They were hiding an innocent boy. R took my shoulders in his hands and gazed into the space between our bodies. I wanted to tell him that I knew I'd never learn anything, no matter how long I waited. But he had covered my lips with his, and I could say nothing more. And that is something I just noticed right now. So we have her writing a book about a woman who can't speak. And as his lips meet hers, she can't say anything more. Of course, because they're kissing, she can't speak, but that has to be a parallel, right? Let me know what you think in the comments. Which brings us to chapter 18. I wonder how many days I've been stuck here in the clock tower. I have no way of knowing. So we're back to girl who can't speak except when she types. Imprisoned in the clock tower. In the beginning, to count the passing days, I made a mark with my fingernail each morning on the leg of the chair. So that's cool for 2 reasons. Well, 1 reason really, but we know that a lot of people who are imprisoned, they keep track of time by making notches in a wall or the floor or an object in this case. But also, what happened in the real world? We lost calendars. time has no meaning anymore. And so now we're really starting to see her find the story, but how her own story is affecting the story she's writing. But what good would it do me to know the day or the date? She finds a small room, a bathroom, and she could see the roofs of houses, fields, a stream, a park. But what I did find was a puzzle made of bent wire, some thumbtacks, a tube of menthol-scented cream, an empty box of chocolates, a pack of cigarettes, toothpicks, a shell, finger cots. Finger cots? What's a finger cot? A thermometer, a glasses case, that sort of thing. I tried to imagine how all of these things had come to be in the drawer. And this is when she starts to fantasize, well, not fantasize, but imagine that there was a serious, taciturn old man without attachments. And he was the one who lived in this steeple. At last I could pass the time playing with the wire puzzle. The bed was another thing that altered my impression of the room. He had brought it up himself, and it was just a simple folding sofa, but still it must have been extremely difficult to carry up the winding stairway. Still, it had apparently been worth the effort it had cost him to move the bed, since he did all sorts of things to me on it. And she's looking at this pile of typewriters, but gradually the dust clogged the keys, and the paint faded so that it was impossible to tell it from the other, her own. And now it was simply melted into the mountain of machines. I wonder if what he says is true, that someone's voice is trapped in every typewriter here. And he treats me just as he pleases. He brings her meals and watches her eat. He sets the tray on the table, sits down across from me, rests his chin in the palm of his hand, and stares at me. He never takes a bite. I'm left to dine alone. And at night he strips me, makes me stand under the light, and then he washes my body. But then also he brings her these things called clothes, in quotes. First of all, the materials themselves are strange. Vinyl, paper, metal, leaves, fruit peels. When they're handled roughly, they tear away from the body or cut the skin or tighten around the chest, which is why the garments have to be put on slowly with great care. And needless to say, my nerves are frayed. In the past few days, I've begun to feel my body growing more distant from my soul. It's as though my head and arms, my breasts and torso, and legs are all floating somewhere just out of reach, and I can only watch as he plays with them. I wonder if there's any way out of here. Of course I think about the possibility. Occasionally someone will look up from the clock on the tower to check the time, but of course no one notices me. One day I saw him laughing and chatting with some of his students in the garden, and she listens. No matter how much you're tempted, you mustn't look at the keyboard. That's the secret to improvement. You find the keys with your fingers, not your eyes. Close your eyes and let your fingers feel the typewriter. The position of the keys, of course, but also the shape of the levers, the thickness of the roller. Learn all of it with your fingers. From now on, if you look at the keyboard during class, I'll be handing out a punishment. Things are getting serious. Is she going to have some companions in the clock tower? I don't know. We'll see. But our narrator did not venture back down to the hidden room again after the memory police came to search the house. The more I thought back over the events that night, the more they seemed to retreat, one by one, from reality. So she's even forgetting these events. But I knew that sleeping with R had been the only way to survive that horrible night. Or so I said to comfort myself. And I like that last aside because at least she is second-guessing herself. And she puts aside the manuscript pages she'd written that day, and she takes the speaker from its hiding place behind the dictionary and held it to her ear. Ah, it's bath day, is it? The sound of water came to me intermittently, like a soft murmur. Of course, I had never seen how he'd managed to wash himself. But as I listened, I felt as though his movements were coming to me through the funnel. I was able to trace the contours of his body, able to recall the movement of each muscle, the angle of each joint, the pattern of each vein showing through his white skin. So now not only is R kind of a prisoner, her protagonist is kind of a prisoner. She's turning into kind of a creeper, right? First of all, she slept with R. And now she is listening to him and imagining his body as he bathes, which makes me wonder what she's going to evolve into, right, by the end of the book. Because if she's putting herself in the place of the, quote unquote villain in her own story, what does that say about her? Which brings us to the final chapter of this read-along video, chapter 19. Several weeks had passed since the old man's birthday party. One of these was a chance encounter with an old woman during a walk in the evening, and she is looking to be hidden. Yes, a poor woman wants to be hidden, but she says, no way, I can't do this, because she thinks potentially the memory police, this is a trap of the memory police. But then a week later, she suddenly vanished, this woman. She had no way of knowing whether she had run out of vegetables to sell, or had moved on to a different spot, or had found a place to hide, or if she'd been caught by the memory police. Another significant incident that took place was that the former hat maker and his wife, who lived in the house across the way, came to stay with her for the night. So R's got to keep quiet, right? So it's a little bit inconvenient, but uneventful, thankfully. But she finds a dog. The memory police sent a truck to remove all the furniture from the house, but for some reason they had left the dog. When it became clear that no one was coming for him, I consulted with the head of the neighborhood association and finally decided to adopt him. And his name is Don. Don, but she thinks Don Juan or Don Quixote. I don't know, maybe it's just Don. But this is where I'm thinking the dog is going to give R away. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but I really do love these situations that the author is setting up, right? So the first one is the old man gets taken by the memory police and then released very quickly, and we're left to wonder, is he a double agent? So far he's not. And now she's adopting a dog, which my mind immediately goes to, this dog is going to sniff out R, give him away. But maybe it won't, because she has subverted my expectations so far. But just as things seem to be calming down, after these relatively uneventful weeks, another disappearance occurred. This time, novels disappeared. So this is the ultimate disappearance for our protagonist. Obviously, she's a writer. What is she going to do? And so what they do is R says, bring everything to me. Store them in this room that I'm in. I don't need a lot of space. All the novels, including your manuscript, in fact. But losing novels is hard for me, I said. It's as though an important bond between the two of us is being cut. And of course, but more than that, right? That's her livelihood. That's everything she does. That's everything she knows. But by evening, the disappearance was settling even in more rapidly. People were bringing books to burn in fires that had been started in parks and fields and vacant lots. But I chose a dozen books from my shelves and took them to R for safekeeping, along with the manuscript I was writing. And they find a great mountain of books was already burning, sparks high into the night air. And I really love this description in its entirety. It's such a great image. The flames, like some enormous living creature, shot up to the sky, higher than the streetlights, higher than the telephone poles. When the wind blew, a great mass of burning pages danced into the air. The snow had melted all around, and the mud sucked at your shoes with each step. An orange light illuminated the slide, the seesaw, the park benches, the walls of the restroom building. The moon and the stars were nowhere to be seen, as though they had been scattered by the brilliance of the flames, and only the corpses of burned books lit the sky. I love that for so many reasons, right? Even aside from the fire, it's awesome that the snow that has plagued these people for so long is melting, and their feet are just squelching in this mud. But then, amid all of this fire, a young woman suddenly moved out of the circle of onlookers, climbed up on a bench, and began to shout something. Startled, the old man and I exchanged a nervous glance. Others in the crowd turned to look at her, and our narrator immediately wants to help her, but the old man says, I'm afraid it's too late. 3 members of the memory police had appeared from the woods and were already pulling on her arms. And I thought this was cool because while she's standing up there, she's wearing something that the narrator describes as some kind of frayed object on her head. And then she remembers, of course, a hat. I was suddenly able to remember. And remembering becomes a theme throughout the rest of this chapter. The man who lived across the street used to make them, but they disappeared years ago. You wore them on your head. And the way she did, didn't you? So they move on. Still, as each volume left her hand, I felt a slight twinge, as though the hollow place in my memory were being enlarged book by book. So we repeated the process, burning some books, pulling the cart farther along, finding another fire. The hill came into view. A fire was raging halfway up the slope, and it is the library that is on fire. The library was completely engulfed in flames. And all these people are standing around talking about it. I wonder what they'll do with the land when it's gone. I suppose they'll leave it the way they did with the garden. But I heard they'll build a headquarters for the memory police someday. We climbed a bit farther up the hill to the observatory and found it deserted. The observatory where her father used to work, go bird watching. The windows were broken and covered with cobwebs. Cabinets and desks had been overturned, and the floor was strewn with trash of all sorts. I remember hearing a saying long ago, men who start by burning books end by burning other men, I said. And who knows, maybe that's how this book is going to end. The last thing to disappear are going to be people, with the exception of the narrator, of course, because she's telling us the story. What a bleak end that would be. But I'm okay with bleak endings. We'll see where it goes. And of course, that line of thinking leads her to this next thought. But what if human beings themselves disappear? I asked. This was the question that had been on my mind. The old man swallowed and blinked again. You have to stop worrying about things like that. The disappearances are beyond our control. They have nothing to do with us. We're all going to die anyway, someday. So what's the difference? We simply have to leave things to fate. The library continued to burn, and I picked up one of the books from the pile at my feet and threw it out the window. The pages had caught the breeze and had fluttered as it flew, as if dancing on air, as if dancing like a bird's wings, right? How did it feel when the fairy disappeared? Oh, it's so long ago, I don't really remember. Did you worry about how you would make a living? I picked up a thick, heavy book with a brown paper cover. I suppose I did. It was upsetting at first, but don't worry. You'll find something else to do, and eventually you won't even remember that you used to write novels. But I'm going to write them in secret. Do you think you'll be able to? I don't know, but Art told me that I had to, that my soul would die if I didn't. I've been doing what he told me to do, he said. I've been listening to the music box every day, but I don't feel any different. My lost memories aren't coming back, and I don't feel any stronger. All I hear is a lot of strange sounds. I followed the arc of the last book as it tumbled through the air, and suddenly I realized that long ago I had stood at the same window with my father and looked out at a similar sight. I took a deep breath and felt a slight pain, as though a spark had found its way into the bottomless swamp of my heart. A bird. I remembered. The pages of the book had opened and fluttered through the air just the way birds had once spread their wings and flown off to distant places. But this memory, too, was soon erased by the flames, leaving behind nothing but the burning night. What a great series of chapters. I love those ones. There's so much is happening, and I know we're ramping up toward the end, so it makes sense that things are accelerating. But what does that mean at the end? What do you think? So she remembers birds, but then she kind of forgets them immediately as the pages burn up. I'm not quite sure. And do you think this love affair is going to go on, or it's going to end when the dog finds R? Of course that's going to happen. So for next week, let us read chapters 20 through 24. And there will only be one more video after that one. I'm really enjoying this book. I appreciate the care the writer is going into with the parallelism, with the novel within the novel, with the symbolism, with the metaphor, with the foreshadowing, all of these things. And I'm picking so much more of it up while I go through these chapters a second time, and I hope you are too. Well, let me know what you're thinking of the book. Do you have any predictions? Do you think Don the dog is going to give away R? Do you think humans are going to disappear and they will end up just like the books, burning away to nothing? Well, thanks for hanging out with me, and thanks for reading along with me as always, and I will see you next week.